Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to go to a very interesting country. We're heading over to Asia, so we're going to go to Vietnam, a very beautiful place and very interesting historically of course. And we're going to have a taste of a beer called Saigon Export, which is from the Sabeco Brewery in Ho Chi Minh City. I should point out as well, it is a lager beer. It's not the typical kind of craft beer that I review on the channel, but the whole idea of doing beer reviews is to bring you some interesting beers that you may not have heard of. In Vietnam, of course, to find a Vietnamese beer is very rare, but it is becoming more common in Scotland. I think these guys actually have a distribution deal with Tesco, so you might be able to try this one. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll take you through a very kind of brief history of the company. It is quite an interesting one, but if you do want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. The brewery website's in the description for you below. I will try and get an English translated version of it also, so check that out, and there is also a link that will take you to my other reviews that hopefully I can add from these guys in the fairly near future. So anyway, to tell you about the Sabeco Brewery. As I told you, this brewery is based in Ho Chi Minh City, which is actually the biggest city in Vietnam, and the brewery is a state-owned operation. This of course is because Vietnam has a socialist government, but the running of the Sabeco Brewery comes under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and these guys own 90% of the brewery's shares. Now apparently Sabeco commands about 50% of the Vietnamese beer market, and they have a brewing capacity of 1.2 million litres per year. But despite being a state-owned brewery, there was a small public offering of shares of the brewery back in 2008. In 2012, however, the chairman of the board of the brewery was fired by the ministry after he claimed that the government had interfered too much with the running of the company. And at this point, SAB Miller from America, Heineken from the Netherlands, and also Kirin and Asahi had all showed interest in investing in the brewery, but the government in Vietnam wanted it to remain a solely Vietnamese operation, which is of course quite respectable. But interestingly, the brewery's main rival company in Vietnam is called Sabeco. And of course this is controlled as well by the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and also by Vietnam Brewery Limited, who are a joint venture between the Saigon Trading Group and the Singapore Asia Pacific Breweries. And the Singapore Asia Pacific Breweries actually brew many of the European beers under license over there, so quite an interesting thing that there is a little bit of outside influence going into Vietnam that way and into their beer, so pretty cool that way, and I'm sure we'll see some interesting things from Sabeco Brewery in the fairly near future. But anyway, let's get on to the actual tasting of this beer. Another beer that interestingly enough comes under the Sabeco name is 333 beer or 333 beer, so keep an eye out for that when it's by the same brewery. But let's get on to the tasting of this guy anyway. So it is a 4.9% lager beer. I'll just bring up the camera, let you have a little quick look at the artwork. It's quite simply done, but typically Asian. It looks really nice. I like the foil top on it. The kind of goldy colours of course are particularly Asian. I'm not sure how well you can see that. I've just kind of focused the light, but you can see there is the nice dragon on there, which is a typical kind of theme of these sort of Asian countries over there. So really nice, very simply done, but I think very effective. It says on the side, it just says it's imported by Long Dan Limited into Britain. So this guy is actually brewed in Vietnam. It's not brewed under license over here, but yeah, brewed and bottled by Saigon Beer Alcohol Beverage Corporation. So the Sabeco Brewery is also known by that moniker, I should say. So without further ado, let's get this guy open and we'll get on with the tasting here. Plain bottle cap on this one, by the way, but yeah, we'll see how we do. As you can see, nice little smoky opener. I'll just take that off just now. But yeah, let's see how we get on with this guy. The very first beer I've ever tried from Vietnam as well. I should point out, a couple of my friends went over there to tour and showed me some photos, and it looks like an absolutely beautiful country. So hopefully I can go to Vietnam one time and actually have a look at it, because the history, from the history point, the Vietnam War, and just apparently it's just very beautiful. All the photos I've seen of Vietnam are awesome. So as you can see, this guy has poured a typical kind of lagerish goldeny straw yellow colour. You've got a half finger of a frothy white head, but that's very quickly kind of fading away, and that's just going to become a very thin foamy layer, but it looks really nice. There's a little bit of sediment floating around in it there, which looks, it's quite interesting. It's just small particles. There are some big bubbles sticking to the side of the glass, but there are a few little ones just going up towards the bottom of the head there, which is really cool. And as you can see, like I said, it's just going down to be a very thin sort of foamy layer. So let's give this guy a smell and see how we get on. Actually smells really quite sweet. There's a nice kind of sweet biscuity malt coming out of this guy. Good bit of pale malt, but you've got that typical kind of corny sweetness that you get from a lager, from a kind of macro lager beer. And a little bit of biscuit sweetness in there too. It's got a really nice kind of slightly caramel aroma in there, but more of a biscuity kind of corny sweetness coming out of this guy. You can pick up the kind of pale malt bready elements out of it as well. And there is a little bit of cereal too, but it also has the kind of typical slightly citrusy and grassy hops coming out, but overall it's a more malty smell that comes out of it. So a typical kind of sweet, corny, slightly biscuity malt aroma is the most prominent component in here. But yeah, actually smells quite nice. A nice little bit of sweetness in there. So without further ado, let's crack into this guy. This is the Saigon Export from Sabeco Brewery in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. Slange. It's actually really quite nice. It's more of a malt forward beer actually. Yeah. In terms of a macro lager, if you like, it's actually quite nice and quite light and enjoyable, I would say. It's got a nice biscuity and kind of corny sweetness to it in the malt base. A little bit of caramel, but mainly a sort of more cereally biscuit flavour, I think, is coming out of this guy. Yeah. So in the middle of the tongue, you just get a little blanket of a kind of pale malt base in there, but you do get quite a good little bit of nice corny sweetness in there. Some nice caramelly and slightly biscuity flavours. It's got a really nice little sweetness to it. It's quite typical of some Asian beers actually to have just a nice little kind of corny sweetness in the middle of it, and I think it works really well because it's something you like just on a hot day, just something that's nice, just a little bit sweet, but it's quite refreshing as well, and this guy definitely ticks all those boxes. You can pick up just a little bit of the kind of cereal character in there as well. So you've got just a nice teeny little bit of spice just moving towards the front of the tongue there that mixes very well with that slightly biscuity and slightly caramel sweetness. It's really beautifully done, I have to say. Yeah. You've got the hoppy character comes out around the edge of the tongue as well. So you've got the kind of typical sort of grassiness and slightly citrusy flavours that come. It's a quite a grassy hop. There's maybe a little bit of kind of slightly earthy character to it, but it's very, very mild. In the aftertaste, you have that kind of lingering caramel, slightly biscuity malt flavour. Actually, this one is actually a little bit more flavourful than your typical. Than your kind of typical macro lagers. It's got a really, I actually really quite like the sweetness that it has in the malt base, and of course it's not a craft beer, so a lot of people will be saying, oh, why do you enjoy a lager beer so much? But you know, in Asia, to have a beer like this in the really kind of roasting heat is it's really enjoyable experience, I have to say. But yeah, typical. You've got a kind of as I say, you've got a nice kind of pale malt blanket that just goes over the tongue, a little bit of caramel sweetness that just goes down the middle line, some kind of corny sweetness in there too, which is, I think it's really nice. I actually quite like the malt base in this, despite it being a macro beer. And you've got a little bit of cereal too, and around the edge of the tongue you get a kind of building dryness that's just that mild grassy hop and a little bit of citrus in there. So overall, I mean, for a macro lager, I think it actually is really quite tasty, I have to admit. A lot of macro lagers can be very tasteless, but this guy has quite a bit of taste in it, I think. So it is worth trying if you enjoy a nice kind of typical Asian lager beer. But in terms of the mouthfeel, as you would expect from a beer from a very hot country, I should point out, it's very light bodied, a little bit of prickly carbonation, but overall it is quite a smooth tasting beer. There's a little bit of an oily character, and you just get a nice kind of dryness that builds into the beer, and it's a kind of mild grassy hop, a little bit of citrus in there, but you do get a little bit of lingering sweetness too. from the kind of slightly biscuity and corny malts in there. So overall, I'd say, you know, in terms of a macro beer, it has actually got quite a bit of taste to it. It's a lot more flavourful than some of the ones I've come across. And you know, for a beer that you would want to drink on a hot day in Vietnam, you know, it's actually really quite nice. A lot of people might not like that I'm saying this about a macro beer, but you know, it does the job it's intended for. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. If you do find yourself in Vietnam, go and drink the Saigon Export from Sabeco Brewery. Hopefully I can try a few more of their beers in the fairly near future. There was 333. So hopefully I can try that at some point. But I hope you've enjoyed my very first beer review from Vietnam. Please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer below. Always interesting to read them. I hope you've enjoyed this beer review, and please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff, and I will catch you soon with my next beer review. I've got another few Asian beers to review for you soon. Cheers.